On a freezing winter night in a deserted park, an elderly black billionaire discovered a young girl passed out, clutching a crying infant in her arms. Without hesitation, he brought them to his mansion. She had spent a year on the streets, raising her baby brother after their mother's death. Moved by her strength, he adopted them both. 1 year later, he had changed their lives and they had saved his soul. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you watching from. We love to hear your thought. The night lay heavy over the city like a woolen blanket soaked through with cold. The park, carved like a secret into the edge of the upscale neighborhood, was silent except for the sharp whistle of wind rushing through barren branches. Patches of ice clung to the cobblestones. Street lamps hummed faintly, casting pools of dim gold that flickered with each gust. Benches stood deserted, brittle leaves gathered like forgotten memories at their feet. It was a place that by this hour had no business welcoming footsteps, least of all those of someone with tailored shoes and a gait too calm for the hour. Silas Moreau walked with the kind of stillness that only came from long-practiced isolation. 62, tall and composed, his figure was dignified even in solitude. Beneath his black wool coat, his frame remained straight, his hands clasped behind his back, more out of habit than need. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his face, lined but sharp, held no expression, as though carved from something older than grief. Every Friday night he came here. He didn't walk for leisure or exercise. He walked because it was routine, and routine was the only thing left that didn't fade. The air stung his face, but he welcomed it. Pain reminded him he was still here, still tethered to something, even if that something was loss. The park was quiet, predictable, until it wasn't. He noticed it first, not with his eyes, but with a break in the rhythm, the kind of disruption a man like him would notice. A shift in silence, a sound too soft to belong in this cold, too alive, a faint, strained cry. Not an animal, human, small. He turned toward the sound and saw the bench near the fountain, one he'd passed 100 times without ever really seeing it. Tonight it was not empty. A girl sat slumped over, her arms curled around something. Her clothes were thin, frayed at the hems, her knees pulled tightly to her chest. A plastic bag lay at her feet. Her head tilted at an awkward angle, unmoving, but the child in her arms, an infant swaddled in a threadbare blanket, was whimpering. A sound so soft it almost broke apart in the wind. Silas stood still for a beat longer than he should have. It had been a long time since he'd had to decide anything quickly. Then something within him, unpracticed but still intact, rose to the surface. He strode forward, steps brisk now, the air forgotten. When he reached her, he dropped to one knee beside the bench and touched her shoulder. It was cold. Too cold. "Miss," he said, voice low but firm. No response. He glanced down at the baby, its tiny face flushed and wet, the trembling of its body uneven. Instinct took over. He reached into his coat and pulled out his phone. He started to dial emergency services but stopped halfway through. The image of her being taken by strangers, processed, judged, discarded. He had seen the system from the inside. Knew what happened to people without a voice. He canceled the call, dialed another number, a private line. As he waited, he slid off his coat and wrapped it around her, then carefully uncurled her arm from around the child. The girl did not wake. Her face, now partially visible under tangled curls, was young, too young to carry such exhaustion. There was a faint bruise near her jaw, an old one, fading. When the car arrived, a sleek black vehicle that knew better than to ask questions, Silas gathered both bodies into his arms. The girl was feather-light, the baby tucked close to her chest like a secret no one had wanted. He climbed into the back seat, holding them both, the heat of the car not yet reaching through the layers of cold. The baby whimpered once more, then went quiet. Silas looked down. Its eyes were open, glassy and unfocused, but still here. Still trying. The car moved silently through the sleeping city. Silas didn't speak. His mind, usually sharp and distant, was strangely blank. All he could feel was the weight of her head against his chest and the fluttering breath of a child who had no name. When they reached the gates of his estate, hidden behind hedges and towering iron, he gave instructions with a quiet urgency no one dared challenge. The staff were dismissed, save for one nurse with a calm mind and quick hands. Silas carried the girl upstairs himself, past oil paintings and marble floors, into a room that had once been prepared for guests that never came. She didn't wake when he laid her down. The baby was placed into a heated cradle by the fireplace. The nurse worked in silence, fluids, warm towels, gentle hands. And Silas said, for the first time in years he sat by someone's bedside. Not out of duty, not out of grief, but because something in him knew this night was not an accident. He didn't know their names. He didn't know what brought them here, to his path, to his bench, to his silence. But he knew what it felt like to be cold and alone and forgotten. He had lived it in a mansion. They had lived it on a bench. Now, for reasons he couldn't explain, he would not let them return to it. And outside, the wind howled through the trees. But inside, for the first time in a long time, something fragile and alive had entered the walls, something that breathed, something that needed him. She woke up to warmth, not the subtle kind that crept under cardboard or a patch of stolen sun, but real warmth. Soft blankets, steady heat radiating from somewhere nearby, the smell of linen, the weight of a bed that didn't creak beneath her. For a moment Amali didn't move. Her body tensed, waiting for the catch. There was always a catch. She opened her eyes slowly, half expecting a ceiling stained with mold, a stranger's shadow, or the echo of footsteps she'd have to run from. But the room was still. High ceilings, ivory walls, golden sconces that flickered gently. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, and her brother, her baby brother, was sleeping safely in a bassinet near the window, his tiny chest rising and falling like a promise. Amali sat up, her throat dry, her limbs sore from exhaustion, her mind running wild. Her coat, her only coat, was gone. But so were the shivers. Her boots had been set neatly by the bed, and a glass of water waited on the nightstand. For a full minute she sat without touching anything, as if moving might erase the safety she'd stumbled into. Her eyes darted to the door, closed but not locked. A luxury. The last thing she remembered was the park bench, her arms wrapped around Zuberi, his cries growing thinner, her body colder than stone. She hadn't meant to fall asleep. She never did, not really. But sometimes sleep came anyway, uninvited, like darkness that swallowed you whole. She must have blacked out. And yet, now she was here, alive. So was he. The door opened, not loudly but deliberately. She pulled the blanket up instinctively, shielding her chest like she'd had to too many times before. But the man who entered didn't leer, didn't even look directly at her for more than a beat. He walked with quiet steps, a silver-trimmed tray in his hands, setting it gently on the table. There was food. Real food, not from a can, not scraped from a bin. Soup, bread, fruit. Amali's stomach clenched with a need so fierce it almost shamed her. "I thought you might be hungry," he said. His voice was low and precise, not cruel, not indulgent, just calm, like he was used to speaking into silence. Amali studied him. He was tall, maybe 60, dressed plainly, but with a kind of neatness that money wrapped around everything. He didn't belong in a place like that park, but somehow neither did this room belong to people like her. None of it made sense. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice rough from sleep, suspicion threading through every syllable. "My home," he replied, setting down a folded napkin beside the tray. "You were unconscious, in the cold. I brought you here." She looked toward Zuberi, still sleeping. "And my brother?" "Safe. Fed, clean, no harm will come to him here." She bit the inside of her cheek. People lied all the time, especially rich ones, especially men who offered things without asking anything. Her fists clenched beneath the blanket. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you help us?" He didn't answer immediately. He walked to the window, gazing out toward the snow-covered garden beyond. Then, quietly, without turning, he said, "Because I've lost people too, and I know what it's like to have no one." His words didn't ask for her sympathy. They didn't carry weighty sorrow or theatrical pain, but she felt them somehow, not just in her ears, but deep down in the fragile space between fear and exhaustion. She didn't trust him, not yet, but something about the way he stood, not looming, not waiting, told her he wasn't lying. Amali lowered the blanket a little. I'm not a mother. He's my brother. Same mom, different dad. Her name was Nomvula. She died giving birth to him. There was no one else. No one wanted us. He turned then, slowly, and met her eyes. And yet you kept him alive. She shrugged, though the motion hurt. What else was I supposed to do, leave him? He didn't smile, but his expression softened just slightly. Many would have. I'm not many, she said, sharper than she meant. No, he said quietly. You're not. She didn't eat right away. She watched him, watched the fire, watched Zuberi stir and settle again. Then slowly, almost reluctantly, she picked up the spoon and took a bite of soup. It was hot, salty, real. She ate in silence while he sat across the room reading something, never asking questions, never pressing. When she paused, he simply refilled her glass with water. That night, as she drifted back to sleep, her hand resting on the edge of the bassinet, Amali whispered her brother's name like a prayer. Silas, in the hallway just beyond, leaned against the wall, the sound of her voice reaching him like distant bells across snow. He didn't understand her story, not yet, but he knew loss, and now he had met someone who had survived it without bitterness. Someone who had held on to something precious, even as the world turned away. It was the first time in years he had felt the pull of something other than silence, something fragile, something alive. The first morning Amali woke without the sound of sirens or her stomach gnawing on itself. She didn't stay in bed. The sun had barely crept over the edge of the horizon, a soft wash of amber pressing against the curtains, but she was already dressed in a simple sweater someone had left folded by her door, too large but warm. She made the bed with precise, almost reverent care, smoothing every corner of the blanket as if afraid a single wrinkle might make someone think she was ungrateful. Then, quietly, she stepped into the hallway. She didn't know what time the house woke up or what was expected of her, but Amali had never been the kind to wait and see. Survival had taught her that those who waited were often forgotten, so she moved softly, like a shadow, searching for something to do. In the kitchen, the housekeeper, Clara, blinked in surprise to see her. You don't have to be up, dear, she said, half laughing, half concerned. Amali shook her head quickly. I want to help, please, it's the least I can do. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but her eyes were steady. She didn't explain further, she just rolled up the sleeves of her sweater and asked where to start. From that morning on, she was always up before the staff. She'd sweep the hallways quietly, fold laundry before anyone noticed it had been left out, and peel vegetables with practiced hands while Clara cooked. When someone thanked her, she'd smile quickly, then glance away, but every single time she was helped. When someone poured her tea, brought clean towels, or lifted Zuberi when her arms were full, she would murmur a soft, thank you, as if each kindness were a debt she couldn't repay fast enough. One evening, as she finished straightening the stacks of papers on his desk and lined up the books by size on the shelf behind him, Amali gently picked up a worn hardcover from the corner, a biography of Maya Angelou. Her fingers brushed the spine with care, as if it might dissolve beneath her touch. She didn't open it. She simply looked at it for a moment, then placed it back exactly where it had been. Silas noticed. She stepped back, smoothing the front of her sweater, and said softly, The room's tidy now, thank you, for letting me help. As always, she turned to leave without waiting for a reply. Amali, Silas said, his voice calm but firm enough to stop her in her tracks. She turned slowly, unsure if she'd done something wrong. I've seen how you look at the shelves, he continued. You're welcome to read anything in the library, whenever you like. Her eyes widened slightly, the first flicker of surprise breaking through her composed exterior. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Really? She asked, voice thin with disbelief. Silas nodded. Books saved me once. They might do the same for you. Amali lowered her gaze, but not from shyness this time, from something closer to reverence. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice catching just slightly. "I'll be careful." "I know you will," he said. That night, after Zuberry had fallen asleep in his crib, Amali stood in the doorway of the library for a long while before stepping in, her hands folded in front of her like someone entering a chapel. The shelves rose higher than she could reach, the scent of old paper and polished wood wrapping around her like something sacred. And for the first time in months, perhaps longer, she chose something for herself, quietly pulling a novel from the second row, carrying it gently to the armchair near the window. She didn't need anyone to tell her she belonged, but in that moment, sitting alone with words that felt like a world opening to her, she finally began to believe it. Spring arrived quietly, slipping between the trees and across the high windows of the estate, softening the sharp edges of winter with sunlit dust and the scent of fresh earth. Inside the house, something gentler had been growing too, slowly, day by day, in the small, unspoken changes between Silas and Amali. The tension that once lived in her shoulders had eased, just enough to let her breathe without apology. She still moved carefully, still watched for signs that the comfort might be temporary, but she no longer packed a bag at night. Zuberry had started crawling with the kind of determination that made people laugh before they realized they were smiling, and Amali, quiet, steady Amali, had begun to lift her head a little higher when she walked. She spent hours in the library now, curled up in the same armchair near the window, a stack of books beside her, always reading with the kind of focus that made the world around her blur. She was drawn to stories about women who endured, who fought in silence, who carried whole lives in their hands and hearts. Silas never asked what she was reading. He didn't need to. He could see it in the way her questions had begun to change. One night at dinner she asked, "What does it take to start over? Like, not just survive, but really change?" He set down his fork and looked at her. "Courage," he said, "and the right kind of help." She nodded slowly, eyes distant. "I've been thinking. If I could study again, if I had a chance, I think I'd want to learn how to help kids like Zuberry. Kids like me." Silas said nothing at first, but the next morning she found a folder placed neatly on the kitchen table. Inside were printed brochures from nearby universities, notes scribbled in the margins in his tight, precise handwriting, tuition estimates, scholarship options, programs in social work and developmental psychology. At the bottom of the stack was a handwritten note. "If you choose this path, I will walk beside you, not because you owe me anything, but because you matter." She held the paper in her hand for a long time, her heart thudding against her ribs, the air around her too full to breathe easily. That night, she approached Silas after dinner, her voice low. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I don't want to be a burden." He looked at her, gently, steadily. "You're not a burden, Amali. You're a beginning." She applied. She hesitated at first, almost talked herself out of it twice, but Silas never pressured her. He only reminded her, quietly, that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was say yes. When the acceptance letter came, folded in a clean white envelope, she didn't cry, not in front of him. She simply held the letter in her lap and whispered, "Thank you," as if the words weren't enough, but the only ones she trusted not to break. Zuberry grew stronger with each passing week. He began to toddle, to squeal with laughter when Clara played peekaboo, to fall asleep in Silas's lap with a thumb in his mouth and a soft blanket bunched under his chin. One afternoon, as Amali prepared a lunch tray in the kitchen, Clara asked, "How long will you stay with us, dear, now that you're going to college?" Amali didn't hesitate. "As long as he lets me," she said simply. "This is home now." Silas overheard. He didn't say anything, but later that evening, after she helped him organize the last row of books in his study, he said, "Amali, I've been thinking about something." She turned, brushing dust from her hands. "What is it?" He looked down for a moment, then back at her, eyes steady but gentler than she'd ever seen them. "I'd like to make this official. I'd like to adopt you and Zuberry. If that's something you'd want." The silence that followed wasn't from shock. It was too full for that. Amali's hands went still. Her breath hitched. "You? You want to be our family?" He nodded. "You already are." She didn't cry, not then. She nodded once and murmured yes, and in that moment something shifted. Not just in her, but in the walls around them, in the quiet house that had held so much loneliness. The emptiness that once echoed through the halls was now filled with laughter, small footsteps, whispered stories at night, and at the center of it was a girl who had once slept on a park bench, a baby who had once cried into the cold, and a man who had once believed there would never be a second chance to love. Together they had built something neither of them had the words for. But they didn't need to, because what they had was enough. A family, not born but chosen, not given but created. Patiently, gently, one act of grace at a time. 1 year later, the house no longer felt like a museum of memories, but something alive, breathing, constantly reshaping itself around laughter, growth, and the quiet rhythm of belonging. Where silence had once ruled, footsteps now echoed across polished floors. Zuberi's small, eager feet padding unevenly as he chased light across the rugs, his giggles bouncing down the hallways like music. The rooms, once frozen in time, had softened. A pair of sneakers left by the front door, a stack of library books on the kitchen counter, scribbled notes on the fridge about lectures and laundry, all signs that life had not just returned, but chosen to stay. Amali walked the corridors of the university now with her back straight and her head held higher than she'd ever thought possible. Her days were full. Classes in child development and trauma psychology, study groups, fieldwork observations, but every night she came home. And every night after dinner she would sit with Zuberi on the living room floor, helping him build towers of blocks he'd gleefully knock over, or read from picture books he never tired of. She still thanked the staff, still cleared her dishes, still woke early to fold blankets or dust shelves before the rest of the house stirred. Gratitude had never left her, it had only deepened, but it was no longer laced with fear. It had become love, steady, quiet, enduring. Silas watched her from the porch one late afternoon, a mug of tea warming his palms as the sun dropped low behind the trees. Amali was kneeling in the garden, coaxing green shoots out of the soil, with Zuberi beside her, both of them laughing as the boy smeared mud across his shirt. Silas remembered the night he had found them, fragile as breath, nearly invisible against the cold stone of that bench, and now here they were, rooted, vibrant, real. His study had become a quieter space now, fewer unread letters, fewer shadows. Every week Amali brought in fresh flowers for the windowsill. Every month a new drawing from Zuberi went up on the corkboard behind his desk. Family, he'd come to understand, wasn't forged in ceremony or bound by blood. It was born in small choices repeated faithfully over time. When the adoption papers had been finalized, Amali hadn't cried. Not in the courthouse, not in the car, not even when Silas handed her a small velvet box containing a locket with 3 names etched inside: Silas Amali Zuberi. But that night, alone in her room, she sat on the edge of her bed, holding the necklace to her chest, and let the tears fall in quiet waves. Grief for all she had lost, yes, but also wonder for all she had been given. Word of Silas Moreau's unexpected guardianship of a teenage girl and her baby brother had rippled quietly through the city's upper circles. There were whispers, curiosity, judgments both generous and unkind, but Silas didn't entertain any of them. When asked why he'd done it, he would only say, "Because they were there, and I was there, and something in me knew I couldn't walk away." On the anniversary of their first meeting, Amali asked if she could return to the park, the place it had all begun. She wore a plain jacket, her hair pulled back, her steps slow as they reached the bench. It looked smaller now, older somehow, but she sat without fear. Zuberi toddled near the fountain, under Silas's watchful eye, chasing pigeons with a delighted squeal. Amali placed her hand on the armrest, remembering the biting cold, the bone-deep exhaustion, the weight of a child she had sworn to protect. "I thought we wouldn't survive that night," she said softly. "I didn't even expect the morning." Silas sat beside her. "Sometimes," he said, "we don't need to expect the morning. We just have to make it long enough to reach it." She looked at him then, and for the first time truly saw not the man who had rescued her, but the man who had rebuilt himself beside her. Not a savior, but a companion, a father. They sat there as the light faded, not speaking, letting the silence hold what words never could. Behind them, Zuberi laughed as he ran in circles, his voice rising, bright and whole. In the end, it hadn't been grand gestures that changed their lives. It had been the quiet things. A hand offered, a room opened, a name spoken with care. And in those quiet things they had found not just survival, but meaning, not just shelter, but family. And Silas, who had once believed his life was finished, understood at last that love doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it finds you in the cold, in the silence, in the broken pieces, and if you let it in, it teaches you how to live again. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.